Welcome to Think Tank. Think Tank. Seriously, I always go to say, and Sunny does the same thing. I often write and say Think Thank Thursday, Think Tank Thursday, for September 2020. And we've got four stroke five things we're looking at today. So I've just kind of summarized men and personal development in terms of men springing up out of nowhere and sharing, but really having nothing new to share, but being everywhere. Number two, we've got collaboration with industry peers and things that you might think about with regards to that. Number three, we've got the piece that I'm calling when you're not feeling qualified to co-host Zoom and sessions. Number four, it's the piece around draining, kind of finding technology draining, and the back end, building the landing pages, updating the websites, etc. And then number five, we've got the COVID and lockdown question, and the question has been asked, what do I think about COVID-19 and lockdown, and is there a bigger picture? So that's what we've got coming up. So number one, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the original. Money's escaping. Pull up the original text as well, because I think it might be. Which way do I want to do it? Let's do it that way. I'm going to pull up the original text as well, because it's going to be useful. I might want to refer back to that at some point. There we go. That's the one I was looking for. Oh, 17 comments. Cool. Alrighty, so context for this one, just in a nutshell. Today these questions are from Annika. So she's saying that she's been watching videos, in this case men, who have done quite a bit in personal development, but now they're all over the internet promoting their method of self-development. And suddenly, it's a proliferation, but actually listening to them, they're not actually sharing anything new. And so the question is, okay, what's going on there, and what is it about that annoys her? And the thing that we're going to be kind of focusing on here is about the whole thing about missed opportunities. Could you have done even better? Is there more that you could have done? And so we're going to kind of look at it from that perspective. So let me just give you some thoughts around number one. And I've got, how many things have I got here? I've got about 15 little things that I just want to mention. And I'm just going to we're just going to go through them. Some of them will be just words, and others I'll elaborate a bit on that. So the first word is confidence. They just seem to have that. I've said confidence, balls, and bravado. Because when I've observed people in the personal development space, namely the men, and I've talked to many, many women about this as well, I'm saying that I've noticed that the men have the confidence and the balls and the bravado just to go for stuff, just to do stuff, whereas women, not so much. So that will be, if I were just kind of summarizing it, that's the first thing I would say about how it is that they seem to be everywhere and proliferating. What I would also say is there's an element, and the thing I've called it here is the job seekers club. And it's kind of an analogy, but it's true, because somebody had shared with me a piece of research probably around 2005 thereabouts. And there'd been this study, and I hope I'd love to find it again, because it's been a while since I've seen it now, and hopefully it's changing. But at the time there was a study, let's just say if there are 20 things on a job spec, and a man could do two or three of those things, he'd apply for the job. If there are 20 things on a job spec and a woman could not do two or three on the job spec, she most likely would not apply for the job. So there's a real big difference in terms, and this is a mass generalization, because of course we all know that there are trailblazing women in the world as well. Generally speaking, men tend to go for things even when they don't have all of the information, even when they don't have all of the facts, even when they've just got a little bit of the information. And so there's that as well. That can be one of the things that means that men are potentially out there more than women. So that's another. What I would also say is, in the personal development field, and I know it exists in other places as well, but we're talking about personal development here, there's what I call the boys club. And it's not the old boys club. The old boys club, as it stands, is old money stuff. You go to the right school, you're in the right club, that sort of thing. I've always said, again, there's a boys club here. where what the boys do is they support each other. When one of the boys gets in somewhere, he brings his friends in. When there's an opportunity that they can't fill, they immediately recommend their friends. And so I noticed many years ago, probably the first time I was aware of this was about 5 or 6 years ago. I'm like, hold on a minute, because I won't say any names, but like, let's say person number one would be running an event, and then he'd be plugging person number two, and then you get the mailing from person number two, and he'd be talking about person number three, and then you kind of maybe do an event with person number three, and he's now talking about person number one, person number two, and person number four. And there was a clique of about 5 of them that were really big in the personal development industry, but they all supported each other. They supported each other's events. They told their people about the others, and they cross-referenced everybody else's work. So there was this, so I called it the boys club when I first saw it, because I'm like, I'm at a different event, or I'm different space, but gosh, I'm here now, and of a lineup of 7 or 8 speakers, 4 or 5 of them are exactly the same. Because they're moving in cliques, and they're just recommending each other. So that's another thing that I would say is a big proliferation now. In terms of their focus, and I'm going to have to guess here. However, my guess is, and that's also based on the job seekers study, is that they tend to focus on what they can do, whereas women often focus on what they can't do. So they're just going to, if they can do a little bit of that, boom, they're off. And 2 minutes later, they're an expert because of that little bit that they can do. So I know there's a tendency of that as well. And I said they focus on what they sometimes, I said what they can do. And even I'd go as far as say sometimes what they think they can do. So I know there's an element of that. Now, on a practical level, we have to remember things like algorithms, keywords, cookies, and pixels. Because I'm sure all of us who will be watching this video have had the experience where, like, I needed a new toilet handle, for example, just as we went into lockdown, my toilet handle broke. And so I went on to Victoria Plumbing and just, typed in, because I knew the sort of style that I wanted, and I'd seen it on their site before. By the time I got back to Facebook, like 2 minutes later, there's an advert from Victoria Plumbing. And it's like, geez, let me breathe at least. So we know that these pixels and algorithms and cookies and, all of the websites you go to now, you have to, a lot of the times you've got to press that you're accepting their terms and conditions, and that they will put cookies onto your account, etc. So there is a likelihood that if you have watched something on a different platform, and then these speakers have used the same keywords, because you can put SEO, search engine optimization, you put your keywords in, you can tag things, so now anybody who watches something similar, that is going to be served up. And then of course, once you've watched one of them, they're going to keep serving them to you. And it's a bit like the boys club, where you're either going to get the same speaker served, or you're going to get variations on a theme. So it could just be that you've watched something or even listened to something, because same will be for podcasts, and now suddenly the cookies have now got you, and they go, oh well, she's like that, so you maybe want this and want this and want this. So it could just be as simple as that as well. So there's that piece to it. Right, so one of the things I would then say is that they're not sitting around second guessing themselves. They take the Nike approach, and just do it. They probably take more of the JFDI Nike approach, where they're just like, all right, I'm off, let's do it. They're not sitting around generally, oh well, can I do that, and can I do that, and can I do this? And this is kind of linked to the next thing about being qualified to do something, in terms of what you're asking about with the collaboration. So there is that as well. So a couple of things I would say. What you might want to then do is flip what I've just said, and then think about how can you do some of that yourself. A good thing, one thing I would say to get that ball rolling, is you will decide what do you actually want to be an authority in, and what do you want to be known for. Because that, it will help you kind of have a bit more laser focus. And even as I say those words, I'm giggling to myself, because I'm the queen of many hats. And you know, I knew about this whole, I mean, I knew when I was at university about the power of marketing and niching, etc. For some reason, when I got into personal development, I just had such a resistance to putting myself into a box. I'd never done it. And there are times I kind of regret that. 'Cause I'm like, oh my God, I could have been the world's authority on blah had I just put my focus on that one thing rather than doing this and that and the other. So, you know, I'm saying it and part of my brain is like, yeah, Marilyn, note to self. However, myself aside, if you wanted to be showing up on people's radars, a decision, it will be useful to make a decision. How do you want to be showing up? What do you want to be known for? If it's some sort of variation of the silver bullet method, then you start thinking about what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? And everything you then put out in terms of content is moving towards that and building towards that. And you know, we then get into the whole conversation, even little simple things like hashtags, for example, that you then create, and it might even be the silver, but whatever it might be. But if you're not doing these things, which they're all doing, then it can get lost in the sea. But I would say the biggest thing with the sharing, with the collaboration, with the cross-referencing. My intention, which really hasn't taken off yet with the Sharing Saturday, for example, was to get people cross-referencing and sharing each other's work, because there's massive amounts of power in that. And in terms of social media, just clicking a like isn't enough. When you look at the Boys Club and how it operates, they don't just click like and move along, they're sharing it properly, and then they're saying something about it. So and so's running an event, it's going to be amazing, this is the person I used to help me with da 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 da. So they're giving it an endorsement, they're giving it personal recommendation. And as much as you can use fancy algorithms and the Facebook marketing and all of the rest of it and the pixels, there is still not much in today's world that beats personal recommendation, that beats word of mouth, because in rapport terms, you're handing over rapport to your followers. So I would say every single thing I've just said, go back and watch the video. You might have to use the pause key and go, right, that's what they're doing. How can I now do more of that for myself? So I would say you want to flip everything I've said in terms of my perception of what they're doing and what I have observed over the last 20 years, and flip it and do more of the same yourself. So that's what I'd say about question number 1. Is there anything else I want to add? The one thing I would say is that they appear also to, or two things. Number 1, they appear to be more fearless in terms of just going for stuff, but that comes back to the confidence, balls and bravado. And this is no slight on Tony Robbins. The man is a master. He is the world dominator in still filling stadiums, pretty much, you know, personal development. There aren't many people that pull the same kind of crowd as Tony Robbins. When I first did my training, somebody said he's not even an NLP trainer. I don't even know if he's done NLP prac, and if he did, he only did master practitioner. I've got no idea if that's true. And it may not be true now, even if it was back then. But for somebody to even say that, but then to watch Tony Robbins up on stage, and I was sat there as a trainer of NLP going, whoa, he's not even a trainer of NLP. That's amazing. So even if it's just an analogy, even if what that person said to me wasn't true, you can still take that thought and go, well, holy smoke, if Tony Robbins really did start out and all he'd done was a practitioner training or did a little bit of, you know, just random NLP, wow, 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 wow. But I'd say if I had to sum it up, it's going to start with deciding how you want to show up, how you want to be seen, and that will then start guiding you towards the people who are there to see what it is you have to offer. So that's that one. Second one was the collaboration. With regards to the person I haven't, you know, with the person you've met that was asking about collaboration, first couple of things, I would say, you know, go and watch his stuff. See what he's talking about if you haven't already done so, and see who else he's talking to. Because and this is a random example, it's got nothing to do with personal development, nothing to do with collaboration, but let's just say, for example, an organization contacted you and said, we'd like you to be the face of this, join us for that. And I remember back in the days where I was a conference producer, one of the most fun conferences for me to do, because it was I was a massive fan of Formula One, and I managed to talk my boss into letting me do a sponsorship conference. And I managed to get someone from Williams Renault. They were Williams Renault at the time. Oh, I've got goosebumps thinking about it. Someone from Williams Renault at the time, and there was a woman that I spotted in the industry. She was not in Formula One. She's in football. Her name was Karen Brady. Now, this was in the late 80s, early 90s. So she was still managing a football team. But I remember looking at her and going, she's going to be a mover and a shaker. I think she's a woman with ideas. And so I invited her, and she came also as one of my keynote speakers. But one of the things about that is, let's just say you're kind of in that industry, somebody wants you to come and speak or do something, and it's a tobacco company, and you don't smoke, and you're anti-smoking, you hate smoking, you think it's a disgusting idea. Because at the time, one of the big topics I was talking about was the fact that there was starting to be a pushback in terms of the tobacco companies. Because back in those days, the cars were just plastered Marlboro, all of the Camel, all the rest of it. They were just, it was basically, the cars looked like moving cigarette packets. And the industry was starting at that time to push back a little bit. So I wanted to look at the future of sponsorship for Formula One, because if you're going to be losing all of that money from the cigarette manufacturers, what the heck are you going to do for your cash? Because Formula One is a really expensive industry. So coming back to your analogy, if somebody then wants to collaborate, but they're basically the equivalent of something that you hate, or if you were a vegetarian, for example, and the local meat farmer or burger joint wanted to collaborate with you, there'll probably be a pushback to that. So that's why I say go and watch his stuff, look at who he's talking to, look at the work that he's doing, and you're asking yourself, do I believe that he's working with integrity? Would I? And Gina Batt, Gina said something to me 20 years ago, which has stuck with me to this day. And as much as I can, I adhere to that rule and I run it through that filter. Her father, who was a lawyer, her late father, who was a lawyer, said to her, don't do anything that you wouldn't want to see on the front of the Sun newspaper in the morning. She told me that 20 years ago. We met in October 2000. Happy anniversary, Gina. We met in October 2000, and she told me that back then. And it's something that's always stuck with me. So if, for example, you look and you go, oh, I don't like the way he does this and I don't like the way he does that, you then presumably wouldn't want that to be on the front of the tabloids in the morning. If, however, you look at what he's doing, you look at who he's collaborating with, you look at what he's sharing, and you go, actually, you know what, that's in alignment with me. I wouldn't be embarrassed to be associated with him and to have my name on the same bill, if you put it that way. I would say if it's a tick to those boxes, my question would be, well, why wouldn't you collaborate? Because if we now go back to what I've just been saying in number one, about the fact the boys are collaborating, the boys are sharing, they're just getting out there and doing stuff, this would fall into that category if they are in alignment with who you are. Sorry, I keep looking down there because the emails are just coming thick and fast, and I'm doing an event tonight, so I'm just making sure there's nothing that I need to urgently look at. It's kind of, these guys are sharing, collaborating, and just getting out there and doing stuff. So my thing would be, if he is operating with integrity, like, yeah, actually, you know what, I've might have a YouTube channel, has he got a Twitter page, looking at the Facebook page and just going to have a look through and going, would I be happy to be featured there? And if so, go for it. If not, then, this conversation is over. It doesn't matter. I would then say, decide, let's just assume that for a second that you think, actually, all right, I'll do it. So now I'm going to say, decide on the areas that you want to speak on, because his first suggestion is not the be all and end all. That's like a starting point. That's where you throw the ball onto the pitch and go, right, here's the ball. It's in your court. And you can pick up the game and run with it as per the game plan. And you can say, actually, that's cool. Actually, this is the game I want to play. This is what I want to talk about. Now, at the moment, I'm going to be speaking at 2 events in October. And both of the organisations have said, oh, Marilyn, you can decide what you're speaking about. And I'm actually like, oh, because it's actually sometimes easier for someone to go, can you come and do a talk on this? I'm like, yeah, cool. Whereas me having to go, okay, now what am I going to talk about? What am I going to say? And what am I going to be sharing? But even so, when somebody comes with an idea, like I had a Zoom call yesterday with an author of the book, and it's the 1 year anniversary of the book. So there's a section in there about the character, it's fiction, about the character seeing a hypnotherapist. So she wants to have me on her podcast to talk about hypnotherapy, etc. So she had an idea of what she wanted me to talk about. When we were talking yesterday, I came up with much better ideas. And she said, oh my God, that's a good idea. Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. So now we're doing what I want to talk about, because I think you're going to get more bang for your buck from me talking about that and exploring that area than the one she had started with, which really I'm like, you know what, it'll be cursory. I could talk around that, but I've got no skin in the game on that one. So if you decide to do it, you go back and you say, actually, my area of expertise is da-da-da, or I often say no if I don't think I've got something to really great to contribute. I said yes to a Zoom call, a broadcast on Facebook that I did at the weekend, because it was about Barbados. But I opened that by saying, because it's the whole thing, the Barbados are proposing to remove the Queen as head of state. They're already independent. They have been independent for coming up to 54 years. But the Queen remained the head of state even when they went independent status back in the 1960s. And so now the Prime Minister has just announced they're making moves to remove the Queen as head of state. And so they asked if I could come and comment on that. And my first thing when he phoned me up, and also when we started the webinar, is I can be here, but I cannot speak with authority on this because nobody knows. There's no precedent for this. There's no blueprint for this. And the other Caribbean islands, of which there are 3 that are held up as flagships, they all have a completely different demographic, and they have a completely different industrial base to Barbados. So I was talking on a subject that I'm not an authority on. I've just got an opinion about it. So sometimes it's not about going, oh my God, I've got to be an expert on ethics or whatever it might be. You can have an opinion on it, and your opinion is just as valid as anyone else's. So that's what I would say about that. I would also say, if you do decide to do it, come up with your why. Why are you doing it? For the fun of it, like he said, to raise your profile, to highlight a particular issue or idea, to put a spotlight on something you're actually doing. And then once you know the why, what you're then building and how you frame it is then working towards that. So for example, a random one that I did a few months ago was for an organization out in Canada. And they've got people studying for HR exams. I know a bit about studying. And so my why was to highlight photo reading. So that's the end game. And now I'm thinking, okay, what can I share that's useful for the listener, because it was a podcast, that also feeds into having me be able to mention photo reading as a way that you can enhance what I'm saying. So I would say, if you do decide to kind of do this with the talk with him, just think about what is your why. And that's the way I would start with anything that I'm deciding to do. Well, why am I doing this? And what's the benefit for the people that might be listening to this, watching this? And also related to what I've said in number 1 above, the reason he might have just come straight out of the gate, as I've already said, is that men go for it. Women tend to arse about and overthink everything. Now, I'm more like, I mean, some of my clients and my friends will know that I'm more like, and there have been times, I'm not kidding you. Somebody's met me for a coffee catch-up, for example, and they've been said, I'd like to do this. And I said, that sounds brilliant. Why don't we do a Facebook Live? And they go, I've never done one. I will pull out my iPad and say, are you ready? Is your hair straight? Have you got your lipstick on? I want you to just say what you just said to me, and I hit the go live button and they do that. And I've done that with so many people that I've been the very first person that they've ever broadcast live with, because I'm like, let's not hang about. Dr. Mari Livingston, for example, we were doing a coaching session and she's saying all this stuff about being, having a PhD in immunology and hematology, that's blood and etc. and the cells, and it's her favorite thing. And this is just before we went into lockdown. I'm like, I'm sorry, we need to do a webinar. So that's how that webinar came about. I just decided we're doing a webinar. Get yourself ready, choosing a date, be ready by that date. I suggest you do this, have a handout, have a fact sheet, get your website sorted, boom, 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 boom. So I'm more like the guy you're describing. If I see that, oh gosh, that could be great, I'm just going to, let's just go for it. So I would say, if you don't want to work with him full stop because you just don't like him, you don't like his energy, you don't like his personality, you don't like what he does, you don't like what he stands for, of course, move along. But if none of that is, if none of what I've just said is true, and he's like, oh, it's fine. My question then, and this is one, so I've said it to some of my clients, and if I don't just say it randomly, but now we have the context, I'm often saying to my female client, sometimes you've got to do it like the boys. And they know what that means because I've already explained to them about the boys club and how they support each other, how they collaborate. So that's what I would say about that one. But it comes down to, I would say, if there was a word for this one, it would be integrity. I'd be saying, look at the integrity of that. Number three, and I called it number three, but it was part of the same question. You were saying, what qualifies you to co-host a Zoom? Look, I have no idea. Maybe I've just missed the memo. I didn't know there was a qualification in Zoom. Now, that said, I've already seen first off, what I'm sure will be a raft of them, somebody running a Zoom mastery course, for example. So I know there's going to be a load of that to come. But I wasn't aware there was a Zoom qualification. There is no Zoom host qualification as far as I know. Any man, woman, child, and their cat and their dog and their art. Seriously, there is a company that they have like a Zoom. You can hire, for example, a llama to be on your Zoom call. So there were companies who wanted to spice up their Zoom calls and make them more fun. So they would hire the llama, and the llama would be on camera, chewing away during the Zoom. And there were several animals. You could choose which animal you wanted to have. I'm telling you, there's some crazy stuff out there. But I wasn't aware that there's any kind of Zoom host or Zoom co-host qualification that you have to get before you get on camera and host something or co-host something. So I would call BS on that one in terms of what qualifies you. And I'm sure you've heard this before. So you're going to be maybe rolling your eyes, but I'm going to say it anyway. Your voice, my voice, all of our voices are unique. We all have a unique perspective, a slightly different take on even well-established ideas, and even if we're sharing the same thing that someone else has said, there's a likelihood we're going to say it in a different way. I know this to be true because I have lost count. If I just had like a bar of gold for every single person that said, oh my God, I've never heard it explained like that before, or I just love the way you've explained that, oh, you've made it so clear, oh, I love the way you've said that, do you know, I've never really understood it, but the way you said it, so they'll be sitting on, I don't know, Prince 2 project management course, and they're like, oh, here we go, never get this stuff, never understand it. I'll come in and maybe say exactly what somebody else has said before, and very similar to what's in the textbook, but for some reason, it's not for some reason, it's not random, it's intentional on my part, but the way I say it, the penny drops and they get it. They go, oh gosh, never thought of it like that before, hadn't seen it in that way. So there's that. That's just a fact of life. There's also now the extra nuance when somebody, Annika, that has studies as much as you have and done as much as you have and has the skills and the qualifications that you have, it goes without saying that you are going to be able to see nuances and connections that other people couldn't possibly make because they don't have the backdrop, they don't have the depth of knowledge, for example, they don't have the combination. So let's just say when I first, many years ago now, started doing HUNA and Access Consciousness calls, there aren't many people out there doing HUNA and Access Consciousness calls because not many people have both of those qualifications. There are a shed load of Access Consciousness practitioners, not so many people who've dropped £10,000 to fly out to Hawaii and study HUNA. So that is a unique proposition now. But I could have gone, oh well, but who am I to do, oh well, but maybe, nah. I'm just like, sounds like a good idea. Let me test it out. It'll work. Let's do this thing. It's game on. So my perspective and take on that is unique. Just like I have clients who are trainers and master trainers in NLP. I remember one of my clients came for a breakthrough session. So I was saying, what we're going to be doing today, we're going to do the timeline therapy piece. And he actually rolled his eyes and he did and I don't think he meant to. I think it was involuntary. So I looked at him and giggled and he went, oh, sorry. It's just that, when I do, because I'm a master trainer, it's like when people do like stuff like, and he's a master trainer in timeline therapy as well. and I know it because I've been there, sometimes you can't help but follow. You're almost like following the script of what someone's saying. And there've been times I've been on a course or something, I've sat there like somebody's doing a meditation or whatever, and they do something, go, you did that wrong, you missed that out, you know, because they've missed something, they've done something incorrectly, or like, oh no, you don't phrase it like that, because if you phrase it like that, you put a negative suggestion into someone's head. So now, rather than doing the damn process, my brain is off on, well, that wasn't right, well, that wasn't, or you're second guessing because you know now you're up above your timeline, and you know they're now going to go and take yourself above the event, looking at, and so you kind of know what's coming. So anyway, we do this timeline therapy session. We haven't got any children in the group. I won't. Maybe one day we will, so maybe won't. But he was like, "What the bleep f was that?" I went, "What?" He went, "What the bleep was that?" I went, "Timeline therapy." He went, "I've been a trainer for 10 years. I've never experienced timeline therapy like that before. How is it bleeping amazing?" The reason it was bleeping amazing is because there is more than timeline therapy in my repertoire. So even though I'm doing maybe, I don't know, 60, 70, 80, 90% timeline therapy, there are going to be some nuances that come from all of the other things that I do. That is unique. So when you are co-hosting or hosting your Zoom, there will be an aspect that even someone who's rolling their eyes and thinks they've heard it all before probably hasn't, because you're going to bring a unique take to it. And my suggestion is, don't wait for the unique take to just kind of come up and surprise you like a jack in the box. We're back to deciding. Make a freaking decision that there will be something unique. When I was doing a lot of writing for newspapers and magazines in the early 2000s, one of the reasons I'd get recommissioned again and again and again and again and again, particularly with things like, you know, New Year's resolutions and you know, Valentine's post and all the rest, things that come out every year, the journalists and the editors would say to me consistently, all of them, "Yeah, I love what you do. You always manage to bring a fresh idea. You always manage to bring a new perspective. You always manage to bring a fresh take to this." That's not an accident. That's what I decided. I wasn't just going to roll out the same old crap. I'm like, okay, I'm writing about something that a gazillion people are going to be writing about right now, and that a gazillion people have already written about. So when I sit down with that blank sheet of paper, back in the day I would do a mind map, now I just kind of go bleh, and just, you know, stream of consciousness. But when I sat down in front of that blank piece of paper or that blank screen, I'm thinking about, okay, what can I bring to this that is different, that is unique, that brings a new perspective? In photo reading terms, that is my purpose. So don't just kind of go, oh, I can't do it because I've got nothing unique. Sit down and decide what is unique about what you are bringing, and then go for it. And whether you're going for it with this guy, or whether you're going for it with someone else, whether you're doing it yourself, go for it. And I would also say you might want to get to know someone. If you're like, actually, I know you've, because now we had the question about technology. 1 second. Oh, and thank you for this mug. I love it. Looks good on camera too. For those who don't know, this is a present from Annika. I love it. So I would say also, if you're kind of thinking, I don't even want to host Zooms, then find someone who really enjoys and likes the technology and get them to set it up, and you just do what I call a stand and deliver, where you just rock up and do the thing. So, you know, if it's a technology thing, then find someone else who loves doing it and get them to set it up, and you just rock up and do your thing. So that is number 3. Is there anything else? Da, 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 da. Cool. Right. Number 4. Number 4. Finding it draining. Now, if possible, don't do it. What I mean by that is the you know, good old-fashioned outsourcing. I know a lot of people have people who outsource out in the Philippines. That's a popular one. I know there are people who have used Fiverr, for example. That's just one. I know that there's one called People Per Hour. So it could be that you're like, this just is not my forte. I don't want to do it. I don't like doing it. I don't even think I've got an aptitude for doing it. I'm out. So you then kind of go, okay, who can do this for me? And you find someone else to do it for you. However, that takes planning, that takes resource, in terms of money and time, because you now got to show people what you want them to do, etc., etc. So that's not always a straight out the gate solution. One of the things I would say, because I know we're specifically here talking about Book Like a Boss, for example. Book Like a Boss are one of the organizations who do a shed load of help videos. So my suggestion, I must admit, when I'm playing with technology, I just like pressing the buttons. I'm just like, what does this do? What does this do? How does this? And if I get really stuck, I go and watch a video, a help video. But that's not that's not my first instinct when I log into a new piece of kit. I just want to see what everything does and have a bit of a play. However, there are times when I have no idea how to do this. I'm either going to click the support button, which exists within the platform, or their email, because some companies have, a lot of them now have the support chat. So I've just been on BeLive, for example, and I reported a fault yesterday. And so when I finished my BeLive, where I was just saying, hey, we're doing Think Tank Thursday in 5 minutes, a chat box popped up and they said, oh, I saw that you gave us a 3-star rating yesterday because of da 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 da. How can we help you? And I'm like, I've already reported, so I said, I've already reported it to support. I've just checked, it's still not working. If you could give me an update, that's great. So I'm not going to now sit and fight with that. Anyway, it turns out I was correct. There is an issue and a bug in the system. But let's just say there wasn't a bug in the system. I couldn't figure it out. I just asked support because that's what they're there for. Or with Book Like a Boss, I tend to go to their YouTube channel, or I go into their Facebook group, because they have got a Facebook group as well, and say, how do I do this? Or just type in Book Like a Boss, I don't know, setting up coupon codes, discount codes, whatever. A video will pop up. I'll watch the video. Like today, I'm trying, attempting to get more tech savvy in terms of integrations. And so before I kind of had a strop, I watched the video and was like, oh, that's where you find the API key. Because my first was like, where do I find the API key? I was like, oh, there's a video. And now the video is only 14 seconds, so it didn't take me very long. But I didn't know where the API key was in Big Marker, so I just watched the video. I don't have to bother support. I know where it is now. I can just go and put it in. So there is that as well. Watching the help videos are asking for support rather than just kind of struggling to do it yourself. It could be that they're not as set up and established as some of those organizations. So in that case, you'd ask your audience. You will know that there are times where I go out to Facebook and go, how do you do this? And somebody will pop up onto my thread and go, do this. I'm like, great, thank you, love you all, bye. And then I'll just go and do what they said. So asking your audience if you're really stuck is a good way. Now, this one I put a star by in terms of collaboration and potentially swapping. Sorry, I should have more tea. Well, I choose to have more tea before it gets cold, because it's actually nice to have a hot cup of tea rather than a cold cup of tea. So, with collaborations and swaps, the reason I put a star by them, oftentimes the person who is the therapist, rather than the technical person, the word I use for this one is equity and equality, because I often find that the agreements are out of balance. So let's just say, for example, you might be doing, I don't know, giving them £500 worth of sessions, and they're doing, I don't know, 100 quid worth of work. Do you know what I mean? So there's a balance to be struck with this one to make sure that there's an equal exchange in terms of skills, in terms of time, in terms of output, input, etc. However, if you can get the balance right, there are people sitting out there now who love doing all the stuff you really don't like, and they could be in need of your services. So it might be on a physical level. If they live close enough to you, they need some physical manipulation and work, or it could be that on a coaching level they could benefit from what you have to offer. But yeah, I just say do that one with caution and be very clear about the boundaries, what's in, what's out, what's expected. But that's another option. Also, if you happen to have connections with family and friends who have youngsters, teenagers, etc., they're normally amazing with tech, and so it could be that one of them for 20 quid or whatever, a cinema ticket, pair of trainers, although the pair of trainers will probably set you back 120 quid, but it could be that there's somebody already in your sphere of influence that goes, oh, I could do that, I really like to do that, I'd enjoy doing that. So all of those, I'd say, are options to explore. One of the things I would also say about that is looking at it in terms of your mindset, and this from an NLP perspective would be anchoring, because And the question I would ask initially, let's just say at the moment, not possible to outsource it. No one at the moment on the horizon to collaborate with. There isn't anyone that you know who just loves doing this stuff and would do it for, just for the fun of it, even if they really wanted to. Let's just assume that that's not possible right now. The thing I would then say is, okay, if you are the one who's going to be doing it, if it wasn't draining, what would it be instead? For you, what's the flip side? So if you think of it like a coin, one side of the coin is draining. What's the other side of the coin for you? What's the opposite for you of being drained? And for me, let's say the first word that comes to mind for me personally is energized. So the question then becomes, okay, when you think about this, what could you do to be even more energized? Or you do a submodalities kind of belief change where you take the state that you no longer want, you get yourself into that peak state, whatever that is. For me, that would be energized, excited, whatever it might be. And you anchor it onto the thing about tech. Because I know I was on somebody was doing a Facebook Live this morning, and she does the technology for somebody that I know. And I typed on the thread, I said, oh, actually, I enjoy playing with tech. And I'm sure the people on my e-newsletter list roll their eyes because every 5 minutes I'm like, oh, I've got something else for you to test. Any volunteers? They're like, really? More? And actually, I actually did that yesterday. So, in terms of testing out, and Annika, you were the one who tested out a bit of kit for me this week. So thank you very much. Is my life's work and my passion sitting playing with technology? Certainly not. Did I anchor myself into a different state because I realized it was kind of necessary for where I wanted to go and how I wanted to deliver what I wanted to do? Yes, I did. I actually sat down and decided, how am I going to see this instead? And for me, it's kind of like an adventure. It's like, okay, let's figure this out. And then what? So that's gone even further now. In some of the technology groups I'm in, it's not just one or two people. Everybody in the group, if they're thinking about a new piece of technology or a new piece of kit comes out, I get messages in the group and I get private messages saying, Marilyn, what do you think about this piece of software? Marilyn, what do you think about this app? Marilyn, should I buy this? I've had people who make buying decisions of several $1,000s based on my yes or my no. However, and I'm like chief troubleshooter, where I'll be going back to an organization saying that doesn't work and that doesn't work. And like the platform that you tried out for me, Annika, I found a bug in it the first day. And so I've messaged them and I said, can you please explain to me the logic between connecting these two fields? Because in my mind, they should be completely separate. They have nothing to do with each other. They're mutually exclusive. Sent them an email and they came back and said, oh, actually, yes, you're right. We'll fix that. So they got their tech team on it, and I checked it yesterday. They fixed it, but it was a major flaw in the system. And they're not a new company. They got clients. They've been running webinars. It's the ViewStub company. But then I wander in because my mindset is now, I'm going to figure this out. It's a bit of an adventure. Let me see what I can find. And sure enough, I've often joked that I should be an official, technology tester, because I cannot think of a piece of software that I've used where I didn't find something which they had overlooked, the developers had overlooked, their users had overlooked. There are pieces of kit that I use now. They're like the one, the platform that I've used for the membership group kind of archive. There's a button in there. I wanted them to put my name on it. I should have told them to. There's a button in there that's there because I said, this doesn't make sense. For me to get out of this program, I need to do this. I just need a one-stop button. They went, that's a really great idea, Marilyn. 2 weeks later, their tech team had built the button that I suggested. Now everybody around the world has access to that functionality. That's not an accident. A bit like having a sense of purpose. I decided that I was going to see technology in a different way because I realized it was necessary for what I wanted to do. So I'm like, okay, I could moan about it and go, oh, I don't like doing it. Or I could go, you know what? And then I reminded myself, I anchored myself back to the 80s and the 90s, because I was around and I was a secretary and a PA in the days of real floppy disks, and they were pretty much the size of my iPad and floppy. And I was in the days where you had to put your screen and your hard drive and your printer on in a particular order. So I then reminded myself, Marilyn, you've lived through all of that. You had to figure it out as a secretary and a PA. That energy didn't go anywhere. It's still there. Just because I didn't want to do it now, it doesn't mean I can't do it. So I just had to decide for my own sense of sanity that, you know, heck, in a nutshell, I'm going to enjoy it. So that's what I'd say about that. Our final question is COVID-19 and lockdown. And basically, what do I think is going on? And do I think there's a bigger picture? If I was a drinker, this is now where I'd need a scotch, but I don't drink, so lemon and ginger tea will have to do. So, oh, and actually, I just thought of one other thing. Given that we're talking about this, one of the things I was going to say about your unique voice, pretty much everything that Vernon Coleman is saying is in the public domain. Someone, hundreds, if not thousands of people, maybe even tens of thousands of people have said that before. They've said it already. David Icke has been saying it forever. But yet you have seen the impact of Vernon Coleman, because he has found a unique way to deliver the same information that the person over there and over there and over there is probably sharing as well. So that also kind of feeds into that uniqueness of your voice in terms of, you know, because you could say, oh, well, he's qualified to do that because he's a doctor and he's a this and he's a that. But, you know, so yes, he does bring with him a certain amount of credibility, but you will bring a certain amount of credibility with the qualifications you have. And I'd say do a Vernon Coleman and find your unique way of sharing that information. So that's just one other thing to throw into the mix, generally speaking. Right. So, check the time. Okay, we're still cool. Alrighty, so COVID-19 and lockdown. What do I think? Is there a bigger picture? If I were answering the question, do I think there's a bigger picture? My short answer would be yes, I think there is. The longer answer is you know, and the waters are now being muddied, and there's a couple of propaganda machines, let's put it that way, out there, both of which are trying to discredit the other. So now you're in a place where you don't even know what to believe and what the heck is going on, and some of the things that people are saying sound so outlandish. And you're like, well, that couldn't possibly be true, and therein is the rub. I remember watching something and hearing also somebody say, and saying to their child, if you're going to tell a lie, tell a big one. Because if you just tell a little lie, people are like, I'm not going to believe you. But when it's so outlandish, people almost laugh it off or go, seriously, that's so crazy. They wouldn't have made that up. So, you know, I think there's an element of all of that going on as well. But do I think there is something beyond the kind of what's being presented to us? Yes, I do. I personally, I think there's an element of compliance and control. It's weird. We've seen something similar with, I would say, Nazi Germany, and I first talked about the scary parallels and connection with Nazi Germany. It actually would have been about 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I started talking about that in the context of Donald Trump and his style of leadership, and where I thought if he won, it would lead the United States. And I said if he, by some weird twist of fate, were to win the presidential election, my prediction is that race and racism and the kind of outrageous behavior that we saw in the days of Hitler will become more prevalent and will become more normal. Said that 4.5 years ago. There's a Facebook post somewhere. When it pops up on the memory feed, I'll tag it into this group so you can read it for yourself. But that's what I said. And in terms of, and again, there's a propaganda that goes with that also. And if any of you have kind of studied what they did with the algorithms and the Facebook advertising, for example, you will see some of that in play. If I were to take it a stage further, but it seems outlandish to even say it, you know, I wouldn't, let me just put it this way, I wouldn't put it past people that there's a group of people who sit and decide the direction they would like the world to go in. If, However, that direction then gets too out of control and people start becoming a bit like the Matrix, where you almost become too free, and you're no longer living totally in the Matrix. What you want to do is you want to rein everyone back in. And the easiest way to control people is through fear. The next thing you can do is start turning people against each other. So we've always had the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. That's not a new conversation. But we've now got the maskers and the anti-maskers, where there are people vilifying the other side, whether they've got a mask on or not. And you've already seen, unless you're completely living in a cave, how quickly that has taken off and how emotive a subject that is. And when people are busy fighting amongst themselves, they're no longer paying attention to what's going on outside of themselves. So, you know, I believe in synchronicity. I'm not a big fan of coincidence. So in terms of what I'm seeing playing out, and what I know of the compliance experiments of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, I immediately back in April, I was having this conversation with friends rather than online. But I was like, this is like the Milgram experiments. This is like all of those compliance experiments. And then when we went into lockdown, I said, man, this reminds me of the rhesus monkeys. I was joking. The rhesus monkeys, and also the children in the orphanages. Where the monkeys who didn't have human contact would wither away and die, or they would not develop socially. And also children in an orphanage, even though they were in an orphanage, even though they were fed, as in there was a cage, like a holder, where they put the bottle of milk into the holder, and then the child went up to the side and suckled, you know, the way a cow would feed its young. Even though they were fed and nutritionally looked after, there was no touching. When they compared those to children in the orphanages who were picked up and held, and even just holding them to feed them, their physical development, their mental development, no comparison. The ones who were in the cages were what we would have called back in the day mentally retarded. And they were small and tiny and underdeveloped in terms of the physicality of their size compared to those who had human touch. So I was joking back in April when I said, oh, this reminds me of the rhesus monkey experiments, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm like, because now I've seen pictures of babies with the mask on, you know, the big plastic mask, and parents. I've heard stories of parents. I'm in a particular group. Don't know if I'd want to share this one. If you're sensitive, kind of block your ears and come back in about 2 minutes. There was an awful story this week, and it's a first-hand story. It's not one I just read it on the internet. It's a first-hand story in a group that I was in, where a father had to watch his child die over Zoom because only one parent was allowed to be with the child. So the mother is there watching from a distance, watching the child die, because, you know, there's nothing else they could do to save him. The father is at home watching on Zoom. So that in itself is just complete madness. But then the awful thing is, when the mother now has had to hold the dead child and say her goodbyes, she walks out of that space and her husband is not there to comfort her. When I hear stories like that, I'm like, if you wanted to find a way to break down the human will and the human psyche, whether it's intentional or not, this is what's happening. Can you even get your head around that scenario, that you're sitting at home on your device or your PC or your phone watching your child die while your wife is in the hospital on her own watching that play out, and you can't be together in that moment? That for me is the height of craziness, and that I can't even tell you, you know, what that does to someone's psyche. And I have no idea about what was wrong with the child. I didn't like to ask. I didn't want to get too nosy and be like a reporter. I was just like, man, I can't even get my head around that one. But if I come back to what I've just said about the rhesus monkeys and the children in the orphanage, is there an element where whether or not a child who's vulnerable lives or dies based on the amount of human contact they get? I would say yes, there is. and in terms of the way that we function as human beings. And it was probably, I'm losing track because so many things have happened since we went into lockdown. But let me just say, a few months ago, after we went into lockdown, I just made a very brief appearance. It's just my voice. I wasn't there in, physicality. It wasn't camera. But I was on the Jeremy Vine show on Channel 5, and they wanted a couple of people who would be happy to go on live TV and ask a question of the resident doctor. The question I asked, I said, when I was growing up, there was an apple a day keeps a doctor away, yada, yada, yada. Now, things were much more organic than they were back then. So apples may not be what they were, but I'm sure they're still pretty good for you. But I also remember that you would go out and get some fresh air, you get some sun. So the question I asked, I says, look, that was always my understanding. I said, could we be doing ourselves more harm than good by actually now this directive of staying inside? Because I've been saying to my clients since lockdown, if you have a back garden, go and stand in it. If you do not have a back garden, go and stand outside your front door and breathe and get some vitamin D. So that was the question I asked the doctor, and I said, in my understanding, it's vitally important for our immune system, for our physical and mental and emotional health and well-being. And she said, brilliant question, that's probably the best question we've had. I'm like, thank you very much. And she agreed with me. So, all of this, the deprivation, and there's so much going on, and it could all be that it's just coincidental, but let's just put that aside for one moment. The net effect is that it breaks society, it splits society, and if you then looked at the financial impact of that, you've had a raft of people who were living independently who are now reliant on the state. If I can find the footage, I'm going to post you the footage. Oh my gosh, where would I find it on my iPad? I've got like 50 million photos and pictures on my iPad. The hope of finding it again, slim. So I'm just going to tell you in a nutshell. I'm a fan of Star Trek. I like Star Trek Voyager and Next Generation. Those are my two favorites. A few months ago, I was watching an episode, and it was a two-parter episode of Star Trek Voyager, and Janeway and the whole crew were kidnapped and brainwashed, and they worked in this big government factory making components, for they didn't know what they're making components for. She's making components. And so there's this scene where Janeway is walking with her new beau, this man that she's met, and he was saying, oh, we're so lucky that the government looks after us and provides our housing and provides our food. And she said, and you said, yes, we are so lucky. And I was like, that's interesting. And then they're working in a factory, and then this big alarm bell goes off. Yeah, 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 yeah. So Janeway says, because she's new at the factory, they've just been newly abducted and brainwashed. Janeway says, oh, what's that? The new boyfriend says, oh, it's time for our shot. And they said, she said, what's that? And she said, the government want to keep us all healthy, so every day we go and take this, they have an injection. That was it, because Tuvok was scared of injections, so they have this injection every single day because the government wants to keep them healthy and keep them good workers. What it actually was a suppressant which continues to suppress their memory, because Tuvok is a Vulcan. Oh, now we're getting into Star Trek history. We're going to go off on a tangent. But just because of Tuvok's neurology, let's just say that, he was starting to get flashbacks of being abducted and his previous life, etc. So he didn't want to have the shot, and he was starting to resist. But the shot, Janeway was so happy and her boyfriend was so happy that they're getting this shot to keep them healthy. Now, we now got this big talk of vaccines. So, it's like, oh, that's interesting. Then all of their life is controlled by the government because they're working for the government, got no money, no independence of their own. So they live in this government housing. And it was just, and I was watching this, I was like, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm watching what's unfolding here. It's on Star Trek. And Voyager is probably, I don't know, 20 years old or something like that. But the parallels were so crazy. And I was watching it on the day where a breaking, sideline news headline was, they're trying to vaccinate us all and da-da-da. And then somebody else came out and said, don't be so stupid, the government would never do that. And at that moment, because it flashed on my iPad, but at that moment, I was sitting watching that episode of Star Trek Voyager. And I was like, my goodness, life imitating art and vice versa. So my dad always used to say, look, if you're seeing it on TV, somebody somewhere is thinking about it. They've probably already done it. So I think there is a bigger game at play. I think there's a big element of control and compliance, because when you've got people where you want them in terms of their livelihood, in terms of their finances, in terms of their ability to move and travel. I've already done a video on what I think are some of the implications of a cashless society. So that's a whole different conversation. But when you look at all of the components of this, as I said, it could just be completely random. But when you look at all of the components and break them down, there's a pattern. And the outcome of that is that people who once were going out to their thriving businesses, and even if the business wasn't thriving but it was doing pretty well and it was ticking over, they're now reliant on government handouts, and everything they do is now traceable because, you know, cash is being removed, etc., etc. So I think we're living in interesting times, and you know, watch this space. And I would definitely say, and I'm listening and watching to things on all sides. Of course, you're probably the same. People are sending me all sorts of videos, some of which are just completely outlandish, and others you go, oh, that's interesting. And I'm just keeping an open mind. I'm just like, okay, it's interesting. And sometimes something seems completely implausible, but therefore, if I go back to, if you're going to tell a lie, tell a big one, then you have to go, okay. So I've got an open mind. I'm watching everything. And that's why I'm kind of on the track at the moment, as much as you can, start looking at ways that you can create some form of independence for yourself as well. And kind of, you know, it might be you're forging a different path, or you're pushing ahead with the plans that you had and what you were doing, because, you know, there's some interesting things going on out there. And that's one of the reasons why, I mean, I've always been interested in gold. I just didn't have the mechanism and the means to buy it, because, you know, who's got $5,500 every week to drop on a bar of gold? So finding a way that you could do it in much smaller ways but still have the cumulative effect, that's why I was so taken with that idea. And there are so many other things that I think people could be looking at to kind of at least have something that you're doing and building for yourself, which puts you in a more independent position, even if you have to start small. That is what I would say. Right, let's see. I'm here. It was a sudden idea that came up for him. He hasn't done any salon meetings yet. Yes, a llama. True. Yep. Still works. Mix it up. Energizing. You are the go-to person to ask about tech platform, but that's just because I spend so much time messing about. Divide and rule. When you say that's so horrendous, I presume you're talking about the baby. Yes, it is. Sorting medical information. Cool. I will have a look at that. And I just posted a question in the group, maybe too late, and that's fine too. We'll incubate on it for next. Oh yeah, I can't, if it's here, I can't see it. But yeah, you know, but seriously, when you say it's a sudden idea, I'm full of sudden ideas. Most of what I've done is a sudden, Mind Body Spirit Energy Fest was a dream. I had a meditation. I had the worst year, well, I thought it was the worst year ever in 2009/10. And I just like, oh God, I don't know what to do. Come on, give me an idea. And then I just went to sleep, and I had a dream and woke up, and the dream was vivid enough that I remembered it. That is why we're on the 10th year of the Mind Body Spirit Energy Fest. It was a random idea, and I had it at like 3 o'clock in the morning. So I actually sat at my desk until 9:31, because I thought I don't want to ring anyone before 9 o'clock. And at 9:31 I thought, right, they should be awake now. Got on the phone, rang Gina, rang the other person. It was random, and we're still running that event 10 years later. So randomness doesn't bother me. It's like, do I think the idea has got legs, and could it be beneficial to people? That's my barometer. I'm not that interested in like whether it's random or not, because most of my ideas are, until I make them concrete. So cool. Fab, fab, fab. Right, so there you have it. That's what I'm going to say. So I'm now going to go and prepare for this evening's event with the Mayor of Watford. It's an event for Black History Month. It's online, of course. It's on Zoom. I'm going to be the MC for that event. So if you want to join us, feel free. I'll maybe, the link is on my page. Once this video has rendered, I'll drop the link, and I won't move off here because Facebook is a bit fussy. When you move off Facebook when you're doing a live, it just shuts it down. Well, it does on this one anyway, which I think is a little bit, you know, precious if you ask me. But I'll drop the link into this if any of it is free. 6:30 we start. There's a half an hour of music and networking. There's a guy, one of my Facebook contacts. He's going to come and play the steel band. And then we kick off at 7 p.m. with a short keynote from the Mayor of Watford, a short keynote from our MP. We've also got a choir, we've got a couple of poetry readings, we've got some roll calls to do. So it's going to be a fun night, it's going to be interesting. No idea how it's going to turn out. Again, it was one of those, we should do something for Black History Month. Okay, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know. And when you've got a committee of like 7 or 8 people, takes an age to get anything sorted. So we basically, it was kind of sorted yesterday, and I've just had them email what I think is hopefully the final version of what I'm actually going to be presenting tonight. But that's why I'm looking at my emails to go, okay, are they sending anything else? So yeah, if you want to join me for that this evening, feel free. It's on Zoom. You have to register via Eventbrite, but yeah, cool. Fab. And although I'm talking to, you know, these are the questions from Annika, I'm guessing that there'll be elements of this that resonate. So feel free to share your thoughts and ideas in the chat thread. That would be great. And I'll see you next Tuesday for Tarot Tuesday. So if you haven't already put a yes in the thread, make sure that you do that. I'll see you then.